You are now listening to the wonderful voice of Dr. Mindbender, the incredible orator and vernacular rhyme specialist, also known to the government as John Stephen Mack Jr. As I deliver this initial content to all of the viewers out there and many who are interested in the politics of the game, I plan to deliver content that is not only truthful in its origin, but very distinctive in the fact that I specifically have been born as and developed as a master at communicating knowledge. This is the wonderful world of the Mack. And as we know, the politics of today's ramble, known as the game. Very generic terms, but understood by many. A lot of times people call it the pimp game, not realizing that there are very specific players in this so-called game. You have the pimp, the master specialist at put it in my pocket. A lot would say he's the hierarchy of this world we live in, but I tend to believe that his equality to the Mack is better specified. You see, pimps are no-nonsense men that are all about the bottom line, which is the dollar. Nothing more, nothing less. Stacking riches is the only plan. There's no B, there's no C, there's only A. And you got different specialists within this world. You have guerrilla pimps. You have smooth talkers. And you have popcorn pimps, or shoestring pimps, or Newport pimps, as we like to call them sometimes. Now, all three of these categories are very distinctive. So the guerrilla pimp, he's a no-nonsense guy, very serious about his business and resorts to using violence as his main tactic of fear over his women. Now, that's the old way the game was played, and wire hanger beatings and extension cord ass whoopings and all that shit from the 70s. That's that old school shit. And we are now in the era where women are very independent, very boisterous, and have high political positions within this country. Won't tolerate guerrilla pimping. A lot of guerrilla pimps are doing unaccountable amounts of Star Trek years in prison based on their brutality and cruelty. And might I add, here at this channel, we abstain from using violence unless absolutely and imperatively necessary. And in most cases, it's not necessary. I'm sure at some point in this dialogue, we'll get to the point of necessity. But for the keen understanding of those out there who are very intelligent and understand why we refuse to talk about those subjects, well, it's not rocket science. And then you have what is known as the smooth talker. The smooth talker also dwells in the realm of the player, but we'll get to that stage in a second. The smooth talker is a guy whose vernacular is impetuous, like mine's. And like the great conversationalists of the past, guys like Sweet Danny Brown, you know, guys like that with grace and poise, who understood what it meant to have positive cash flow and treat women in a business partner fashion while maintaining all the rules of the game 100% all the time, and everything will be fine. And then you have the shoestring pimp. You know, that Newport guy we was talking about, tennis shoe pimp. That's the guy who came from another world. He was a gang member or a dope dealer. And somehow, probably through tricking or maybe serving dope to a bitch who was off the track, using a pimp's money to enhance her habit, she ran into this gentleman and he told her, you know, that he wanted to hook up, and she didn't need a pimp when she could have somebody like him. He's not necessarily a trick, but he will trick shit off for what he wants in life, or what his bottom line was initially, before he was introduced to this lifestyle, most likely by this young lady. You see, the pimp went wrong somewhere and probably whooped her ass or disciplined her in some way that she just wasn't in tune with under any circumstance. And she remembered the gracious offer this dope boy or gang member offered her, and she gave him a call. He came and picked her up. But she didn't really know his bottom line or what he wanted out of the relationship. And what he wanted out of the relationship was probably one of two things. Either he wanted a freak, because, you know, most squares and lames view that because a woman is in the business is a freak. And a lot of times she's not. A lot of times she's just misinformed. However, this snake finds a way to take advantage of her vulnerabilities and appeal to her different nature. And somehow, through some tactic or conversation or personal happening, she decided to tell him all of the rules of the business. And the rules that he learned was from a hoe's perspective. It wasn't from another pimp's perspective. And although there are real players and pimps and Macks out there who learned the game from a woman or from a hoe who was experienced, the popcorn pimp is uninterested in that. He's only interested in learning what he needs to learn to control her and possibly one or two other females so that he can continuously have free sex with them. Because his dick is his bottom line, although he is fronting as a pimp. And that is the wonderful world of pimping. Something that players and Macks involve themselves in, but don't quite succumb to those rules. Then you have the player. The player is a real smooth brother, very intelligent, most likely educated, because most players are squares. Not lanes, but squares. And what do I mean by square? The word square specifically means living legally. That's all. Living legally. And if you were to ask me, all pimps and Macks would like to follow in that same characteristic. Sometimes pimps don't have that ambition, but Macks always do. Sometimes a pimp's only ambition is to pimp for the rest of his life if he could sustain that living. Because the older you get, the harder it becomes. Due to morality alone. You see, it's hard to be around a woman all the time and not gain friendship and admiration for her. In my personal and professional opinion. That is, if you have any moralistic character to you. Because a lot of times it depends on who that man was before he became a pimp and how he was raised. You have a lot of pimps that were raised in whole households, and so therefore that's what he knows. And you can't blame him for being raised misguided by his parents. And then you have the guy like myself, the Mack, the guy who was raised moralistically with great character by excellent women, exceptional women, and men that had nothing to do with the pimp world at all, or the player world. And if they did exercise any of those extracurricular activities in their spare time, they did not make me aware of it. You see, I was introduced to the game by my own insight, is what I'm led to believe. Manifestation played a major part in becoming a major factor in this business and being a true Mack, a master at communicating knowledge. And so therefore, before I get to the description of what a Mack is, let me recap. First, you have the pimp, and there are 3 different types of pimp. Then you have the player, and then you have the Mack. On this side of the business, as well as the madam, who is also the fourth and intricate part. But we'll get to madams in another second. Or another segment, I should say. Now, on to the procurement of a Mack. Instead of giving you illicit rules on what it requires to be a Mack, I'm going to tell you about my story. As you can see in this picture here, 1995, when I graduated from high school at Santa Barbara High School. In that picture, I was 17 years old. Wasn't even 18 yet. As you can see, I had a mustache, beard, incredible feather, lobes, suit. And at the homecoming dance, voila, what do you know? Beautiful female on each arm. You see, at this time, I wasn't a Mack or a pimp, but I was definitely a junior player. But even with the two women that you see in the picture with me, they were just friends. And we were posing like pimps and hoes, imitating, emulating, acting like pimps. I always dreamt of being in the game. I just didn't know how I would come about it. But I must say it was for all the wrong reasons. I wanted to be in the game for prestige and possibly even free sex. Because a young man's testosterone is usually in tune with that, especially at 17 years old. And let me tell you, I had plenty of girlfriends, sometimes 2 and 3 in the same school. My origins are strange. My family, my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, all of my uncles and aunts, they were born in Belize, that is Central America. And so when they came to the United States, of course, Caribbean families are very meticulous and very punctual. I was always told as a kid, use your common sense. And my grandmother, you know, being a staunch Episcopalian, I grew up as an altar boy in the church as a young man. And I had a lot of spiritual understanding as a youth, even today as a man, a lot of spiritual understanding. And so some of that understanding was a roadblock in my game. And rightfully so. The Father doesn't make mistakes, I'd imagine. He only aids and guides us into the understanding of why we made that decision. But at this age, I knew what I wanted to become, and I knew what I would become. But it wouldn't be until a few years later that I would even be accepted into this world of extinguished vulnerability, and distinguished gentlemen and ladies. Well, after this picture was taken, maybe 6 or 7 months later, I would end up going to jail and getting locked up for a crime I didn't commit. Sticking up for one of my big homies. And that is neither here nor there. Because when I came home, I was blessed significantly. Ironically, the year I graduated from high school was the year I was given a sentence. And after a couple of years, you wake up. During that stint in fighting my case, I had a girlfriend, and I think around 6 to 7 months sitting in a county jail, I was given my own recognizance. In California, your own recognizance means that they could release you on stipulations as long as you come back to court to complete what your sentencing would be. And during that time, I got my girlfriend pregnant. I was only on the streets for maybe a month and a half or so. And then I was sentenced, so I had to turn myself in and go through the rest of my time. And this isn't a story about the penitentiary or jail, so I won't go any further and in depth into that story, but we all have one. Well, when I came home to a healthy, brand new little boy and a ratchet ass baby mama whom I would later marry and divorce. To be continued.